Hello, everyone. Welcome to Understanding Your Rights in the Criminal Justice System, which is the fourth installment of our advocacy series webinar with Foundry BC. My name is Paige. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a youth peer supporter at Foundry Virtual, and I'm just going to be organizing this webinar for today. I'm here to introduce Pivot Legal Society, which is going to be giving our presentation today. And I also just wanted to let you know that if you'd like to have subtitles for the presentation, please hit the subtitles button at the bottom of your screen to be able to view subtitles during the event. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter.
Great, thank you so much, Paige. My name is Meenakshi, and I'm joining from Pivot Legal Society alongside Danielle, who I'm here with, and TJ, our community educator. I'm also on two computers, so I'm going to try and not get confused clicking between them. Before we start the presentation, I want to acknowledge that Pivot's office is located on the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And we want to express appreciation to Indigenous people for their continuous relationship with this land. As an organization and an individual, I'm committed to learning to work in solidarity to shift the colonial default. I also recognize that folks may be joining this webinar from across so-called BC. And again, I want to affirm that the rights and title of distinct Indigenous nations have never been extinguished in BC nor across Canada. I'm really honored to be joined by both TJ and Danielle. And of course, Danielle is a member of the Squamish Nation, and this is their territory. So it's an honor to speak alongside them today. This is just a short overview of the presentation that we're going to go through. So we're going to start with a bit of storytelling from Danielle about their own experiences and insights into what rights mean. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Pivot and our work. We're going to talk about the impact of stigma. TJ is going to describe some basic rights, an overview for people who may be interacting with law enforcement. Then we're going to share some resources specifically for youth, because we recognize that Foundry's work is mandated to support youth, including youth who may be interacting with police or other forms of criminalization. There's a couple of points at the end around calls to action for people who might just feel totally outraged by the time we're done presenting and want to know what they can do to support this work. And then a little bit of Q&A. There were some questions that Paige forwarded that we'll try and address in that section. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Danielle.
Hatswal Tanoya, Tlaitlaktila Queen Kwashamin, Danielle Guerrilla Queensma, Tnachin Sla Slahan Ohumio, Naxin Spalo. Hi, my given name is Tlaitlaktila. My English name is Danielle Guerrero. I'm from the Squamish Nation and the Lil'wat Nation. I'm 19 years old, two-spirited, and I use they, them pronouns. So I was asked to come and talk about some of my experiences with law enforcement. And growing up as a poor Indigenous person, I can tell you that I've had many experiences with police in my life. And I guess to jump the point is that none of them were positive or good experiences. So since January, I've become very involved in direct action land defense work. And I've gotten to know a lot of people who are frontline land defenders. And unfortunately, what goes with that is that I've had to bear witness seeing lots of people my age and lots of my elders and people who I highly respect get arrested and brutalized by police for doing simple things like living on their land or just trying to hold the government accountable for what they're doing. Yeah, so I've had a fair bit of experience, and I figured I would talk about when I got arrested. I got arrested on February 25th of this year while participating in a blockade outside of the port of Vancouver. The blockade was in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en in the fight against Coastal GasLink pipeline. And basically just trying to get the rights that for their territory. Sorry. So I was one of 6 people arrested that day, and I am still facing 2 charges for that. There is one specific thing that I did want to talk about that happened while I got arrested. But I mean, overall, there were lots of things that the police did that was not in their right to do, and they also didn't do a lot of things that they were legally obligated to do. But the one thing that I wanted to focus on today was when I was waiting to get my rights read to me after I got arrested. I was just like sitting on the pavement behind, I guess, the paddy wagon. And I had 2 female officers who were standing behind me. And I remember this one male officer came up and whispered something into the female officer. It was kind of chaotic at that point. So I don't know what he said, but I do remember hearing the female officer's response, which basically is that we can't be that violent with her because there are too many people to witness it. So at that point, I was terrified. I remember like sobbing in the back of the paddy wagon because honestly, I thought that would be it for me. But you know, thankfully, I'm still here. Nothing that bad happened. But I wanted to bring this up for multiple reasons. And first off, as an Indigenous femme, every interaction with police is terrifying. Police presence within Indigenous community directly correlates with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit genocide right now. And yeah, sorry, that was a lot. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is that police don't keep marginalized and racialized communities safe, especially when we're talking about Black, Brown, Indigenous people, and especially right now in Vancouver, houseless communities. But another reason I wanted to bring this up was I think it's very important that if you see somebody interacting with police, I think it is so important that you stop whatever you're doing and you make your presence known to the police and you film it, because small things like that could save somebody's life. Just you being there changes how police act, because then they're held accountable. Yeah. And I just know that it's always okay to film police if they're on duty, I guess, but I don't know. They need to be held accountable for their actions. There are so many times when they aren't, especially I'm going to speak like within Indigenous communities because that's what I know best, but like I said, with the missing and murdered Indigenous women genocide, and then also like Starlight tours and stuff, like there are so many incidences where violence with police happens and they just need to be held accountable. Mm-hmm. So yeah, please, if you ever see an interaction with police, stop what you're doing, film it. If you can, get their name and badge number. But overall, I think anything you're trying to do can wait if it's going to save somebody's life. And then the last thing I just kind of wanted to touch on was just try to remember that it is very important to know your rights to keep yourself safe, but also understand that there are a lot of laws that are unjust, and just because something's legal doesn't mean it's moral. And yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about today.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's really an honor to be here with you and to hear your story, because you have an expertise and wisdom that goes beyond what's on the books, I think it's really important for people who are working as like professionals in these fields to also understand what the police do and what police actually means, because for a lot of us, and I'm thinking of like myself as well, we are trained in systems that normalize the police and that erase the violence that they do. And like that violence is intergenerational and not new. So really want to express appreciation to Danielle. We're going to have like a bit more like informal chatting at the end of the presentation. And with the grounding of Danielle's story, I'm just going to share a little bit more about Pivot's work and why we were invited by Foundry to do this presentation. So we're a legal advocacy organization, and we specifically use the law to address the root causes of poverty and social exclusion. We try to undertake strategic litigation that produces the maximum positive change that we can. And I also acknowledge that we're using colonial laws to do that, that our participation in the legal system in some way also upholds an illegal and unjust system that's been imposed on these territories. The key areas that we work in are drug policy, and specifically the rights of people who use drugs and affirming the leadership of people who use drugs and coming up with solutions. We're in the midst of not one, but two public health crises, one being more than 4 years old at this time and having killed thousands of people across so-called Canada. We also work in areas of police accountability, which is the campaign area that I foremost work in, and specifically calling attention to both harms of policing and then potential solutions that we could replace policing and criminalization with. We work on the rights of unsheltered people, and Danielle specifically mentioned how the police target unhoused communities. In 2018, we published a report called Project Inclusion, Confronting Anti-Homeless and Anti-Drug User Stigma in BC, that looked at how those two stigmas are tied together and often used to perpetuate the criminalization of communities. And then finally, we work in the area of sex workers' rights, essentially affirming that sex work is work and people deserve access to safe working conditions. I think a lot of people want like a Know Your Rights presentation that tells you like ABC, if you do this, you'll be fine. Here's how you fight back. Here's what you do if you're not treated justly. But we can't really do that without talking about one, we can't really do that at all. And if that's what you wanted to hear, it's going to be a disappointment. What we have to look at is how stigma informs law and policy. We see that in terms of how certain people are policed and how policing of certain communities is justified, whether it is low-income, urban, or reserve communities, whether it's racialized communities, communities of refugees or undocumented people. Stigma is always informing the response to that. And in Pivot's work, we specifically look at how poverty and social exclusion further that. A lot of people's lives have been drastically changed by COVID-19, and we've had to totally rethink how we organize our lives. And I invite people who are watching to think about how people who live in public space, who participate in criminalized economies, whether it's dealing, sex work, vending, how their lives have been totally disrupted and often a second, third, or not thought at all in terms of the response. Who's been criminalized in the midst of public health emergencies? So people may have been aware that there were orders that prohibited evictions, like I couldn't get evicted from my apartment building if I didn't pay rent. Yet somehow people living in tent cities were evicted not once, but twice. And a lot of people have been evicted every single day. So we really have to look at law and policy through the lens of like who is forgotten and who is deliberately ignored. That brings us to a human rights framework. And again, this is like using colonial tools. So not only is it imperfect, but sometimes it's actually harmful and undermines Indigenous sovereignty. But in our work, when we're using strategic litigation, we might be using tools like the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to argue for certain equality measures. We may use human rights legislation to argue about the discriminatory impact of certain laws on people if they have mental health issues, if they are racialized, if they are poor. And then we may look at provincial human rights codes as they relate to provinces. So unfortunately, a lot of these tools are designed in a way that actually doesn't create accountability. And you'll find that specifically when you're looking at police accountability, that while it's obvious who is targeted by the police, even by their own data, it's very hard to hold them accountable. And I'm specifically thinking of things like street stops, where we know the data shows that Indigenous women in particular are being disproportionately stopped by the VPD. Yet it's been very challenging to argue for a complete moratorium on a discriminatory practice like that. So I bring up these kind of tools and these pieces of legislation to kind of illustrate like how the power flows, but also doesn't mean that people have access to millions of dollars to like actually hold people accountable. And so sometimes the best thing you can do, like Danielle said, is just stop and film an officer, and maybe you're going to radically change the outcome of that interaction with the police. I also want to bring up a couple of pieces, again, specifically relevant to youth. As an organization, Pivot doesn't specialize in youth justice, but there are a couple of key acts that youth or young folks should be aware of. One being the Youth Criminal Justice Act, so distinct from the Criminal Code of Canada. There's also something I learned about called the Parental Liability Act, where someone's parents, not their guardian and not MCFD, but someone's parents could be held liable for losses or damage of property. And finally, I mentioned the Child, Family and Community Services Act, and so that's the kind of legislative authority that creates the so-called child protection system in BC that authorizes social workers, whether they're working for MCFD or a delegated Aboriginal agency, to undertake protection measures, including taking children into the care of the ministry. I'm going to hand it over to TJ now, who's going to talk about rights.
Thanks, Meenakshi. And thank you, Danielle, for sharing your wisdom. That was amazing. I wanted to start out by saying, or echoing something that Meenakshi was touching on earlier, in that we can, tell you these things, but can't promise this is how it's going to turn out. There's a difference between knowing your rights and asserting your rights, and asserting your rights can sometimes not be the safest, choice. And so just try to use your common sense in these scenarios. If you're interacting with the police, if you feel like it's not safe to assert your rights, then just do what you can to stay calm and de-escalate the situation in any way that you can. But if an officer does approach you, the first thing you should always say, and you should always remember this, is, "Am I free to go?" And if they say yes, then you just walk away. And if no, you ask, "Am I under arrest?" If they say yes, you're under arrest. You say, "Why am I under arrest or being detained? Can I have your name, badge number? I want to speak with my lawyer, or I want to remain silent." And it's the same, yes or no. And am I free to go? They might keep asking you questions. You don't have to answer any of these questions. And you don't have to speak to police unless you're actually under arrest, driving a car, involved in a car accident, or riding a bike. You must provide your name and address, but nothing else. If the bike car is not your own, you must also provide the name and address of the owner. Bikes are often treated the same as cars in this context. Yeah. Next slide. Here's other things that you can say when you're stopped by the police. Am I under arrest? If so, please tell me why. If I'm not under arrest, am I free to go? Or I want to exercise my right to silence and talk to a lawyer before I say anything to you. And generally, it's best to keep quiet, and don't lie to the cops because that could lead to extra charges. So it's better to stay silent than to lie. And give them your name, address, and birth date, and you have the right to speak with a lawyer. And you can say, I want to speak to a lawyer before I say or sign anything. I want to speak to my lawyer before agreeing to a police interview. I will take legal advice from a lawyer and do not take legal advice from the police. That's not their job. And it's worth mentioning that once you do speak with a lawyer and you're given that right, and they address that, they might continue questioning you. You don't have to answer anything until your lawyer is present, but they might continue questioning you. Next slide. Your rights upon arrest and detention. If you're arrested or detained, you have the right to be told why you're being charged in a way that you understand, be told what your rights are in a way you understand, talk to a lawyer about your situation, talk to a lawyer, guardian, or other adult before you give a statement to police, and have them with you if you decide to give a statement. This is for if you're a youth. Not answer any questions about the crime and be warned that if you do say something, it may be used against you in court. Have the validity of the detention determined by way of habeas corpus and to be released if the detention is not lawful. And the police must give you a phone, a list of free lawyers, and a private place to make calls. And upon custody and release, the police may decide to release you at the scene of arrest on the basis of one of the following documents: a summons, notice to appear, promise to appear, with or without an undertaking, or a cognizance, with or without an undertaking. These documents advise you of the offense you allegedly committed and give you a time to appear in court. You may be kept in jail for up to 24 hours before appearing before a judge or justice of the peace. People who commit crimes when they are 18 or older are considered adults and are dealt with in an adult court. Although an accused youth may attend a youth justice court, they can still receive an adult sentence after the evidence, including the witness and victim testimonies, are heard and the court has issued a finding of guilt. And arrests under the Mental Health Act. Police can use force to take you to a hospital for an exam by a doctor if they think that you are acting in a way that is dangerous to yourself or other people, and you seem to have a mental disorder that needs treatment. The police can become involved under the Mental Health Act, even if you have not committed a criminal offense. So this can, the police are given a lot of power. You might have heard about wellness checks recently. That falls under the Mental Health Act. They have the authority to arrest you if someone has made complaints about you. And if you are acting erratically, it can be arbitrary. If you're acting out in public in a certain way, the police have the authority to arrest you under the grounds of the Mental Health Act.
So what TJ just shared is like an overview of some really basic and fundamental rights that people have, specifically the know your rights when you're being stopped or detained by police, and that really important question, am I free to go? And as TJ said, there's ideal rights, and then there's the reality of what happens when you're actually interacting with the police. And so again, it's really important to, trust your gut, use your common sense. Sometimes you may have to de-escalate a situation, even when you know that the police are acting inappropriately. But that's going to be the safest thing for you because you're alone, you're isolated, there's not a lot of people around, and you have to make a call around, like, just politely but firmly, trying to wrap up an interaction, even if you know what the police are doing is not right. And that's a really heartbreaking part of this Know Your Rights work, is the other side of that being that we have very, very limited systems of police accountability, and very little access to justice in that realm.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to bring up COVID-19. Is this you, TJ, or is this me?
I think it's you.
Okay.
So all three of us.
So, you know, we're all living in this state of a new normal. These new powers, people may have heard over the weekend that there was a new ministerial order that expands police powers and increases fines. So essentially, we're in this provincial emergency created by the global health crisis of COVID-19. So this emergency has unlocked extraordinary government powers, including the ability to create and enforce new rules, to shorten time limits, and to do away with like some procedural protections. Danielle, I wonder if you want to say a little bit about what the impact of COVID-19 has had on like your experience with the court system.
So, because I got arrested in the end of February, my court date was supposed to be in the end of March. And then the pandemic got really big. So my court date got moved to April, and then it got moved to May, and then it got moved to June and July. And finally, in about the middle of July, I had court over the phone, which was very strange. It was like 3 hours of listening to other people's court hearings, and then finally mine got adjourned. And then I was also supposed to be again on Friday, and then it got adjourned again. So it's been a long time.
So you can see how this has really created a situation where like someone's legal matters could be like hanging over their head for not weeks as originally people thought, but months now. So even if you are a young person or a really old person or just a person who likes to go to the beach and party, it's really important to be aware of ministerial orders and their enforcement powers. So in these slides, there's 2 links. The first one is a link to the public health orders. So people know about Dr. Bonnie Henry. These are public health orders ordered by our provincial public health officer. So right now that includes a prohibition on gatherings of more than 50 people. And then there are also a big number of ministerial orders that have been made. So we have a public health emergency, and we also have a provincial emergency that has authorized our Minister of Public Safety, Mike Farnworth, to create a number of orders. The one on Friday, I haven't read in detail, so I can't explain fully, but it creates a new like regime of enforcement because, you know, the government is responding through however problematic ways they do. So things like people are having parties, there's a risk of community infection. So they've created this more punitive approach to restrictions on gathering. So on this website, bclaws.ca, you can see all of the current ministerial orders. So those are separate from like the public health orders.
I think it's worth noting also that demonstrations fall under the ministerial order, and there's a lot of injustice happening right now. So there's a lot of protests, and they may be able to enforce, you know, those orders. So just make sure if you do go out and you're demonstrating to wear a mask and stay 2 meters apart, and to, you know, just be conscious of that, you know, that dynamic that's in play now. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, TJ. Because the thing about the order on Friday is that now it has given enforcement powers to the police. and other types of enforcement officers like bylaw officers in an expanded way. And given everything that we've talked about in the presentation up until right now, you can see why it would be concerning to have the police enforcing public health issues when we know that stigma is embedded in so many of their practices. This is just a list of some additional resources that are particularly geared towards youth. So one really important thing to know, if you are a young person being under 18 and charged with a crime, you are automatically eligible for legal aid. You don't need to prove your income. Their tariff is designed so that youth under 18 have access to criminal counsel. If you're over 18, there are more restrictions in place. You will have to provide proof of income. You may need to be facing certain types of potential sentences, like a custodial sentence, like a jail sentence. So you can call legal aid. It's probably the easiest thing to do during COVID rather than trying to go in person. I also included some links to pivot specific resources. So we have a resource list that's designed for COVID. We also have all of our resources available on our website. The Know Your Rights handbook that TJ used in those slides. We also have rights cards. If you work at an organization that serves youth, you're welcome to contact us and we can try and mail you some resources so that you have them on hand to give out physical copies. There is the Office of the Representative for Children and Youth. That office is mandated to support youth in care around issues of injustice when they're dealing with child protection. There's also a Child and Youth Legal Center that's operated by the Society for Children and Youth in BC. Again, because of COVID, you want to take a look at their websites and call them rather than trying to go in person. And finally, West Coast Leaf has also designed some resources that are specific for young folks, including resources about your rights in the workplace, around online harassment, things like that. So I added in a couple of things here for folks who may be hearing this presentation and, you know, really like angry or passionate about what we're talking about and wanting to know, like, what can I do? Like, what can I do to take more steps around, like, all of the, you know, these systemic issues? So there's a couple of specific things people can do. Right now, there's a call for a ban on police street checks, and there's an open letter that people can sign on to. Street checks are also known as street stops, carding. They all essentially mean the same thing. It's a illegal stop by the police that allows them to collect information. And we know, again, from the police's own data, that they use those stops for racial discrimination. There's a recent letter written by Black Lives Matter Vancouver that has current demands addressed to the city of Vancouver. There's an open letter to the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. The food bank has allowed uniformed police officers to attend food distribution lineups. Obviously, for lots of people, trying to access a social service and being met by a police officer is not what they want at all. So these major organizations really need to rethink the involvement of law enforcement. And you may have just been hearing about things like defunding the police in the news, online, on social media. So defund.ca has lots of resources and information about what does that actually mean? How can you try and make it happen? Who are the people in your city or province who you could be writing to express your thoughts on the role of police and the roles that they should not be playing? So we have a little bit of time set aside for Q&A, and I'm just going to pull up the questions that Paige had sent us earlier, and they're pretty general. One of them was just like tips on how to talk to your lawyer. And I wonder if you could, like, I'll put that over to Danielle and TJ. Just any tips or advice that you have for people when they're communicating with their lawyer and maybe they've never had a lawyer before.
I feel like I might be the wrong person to talk about this. I've had minimal conversations with my lawyer. Yeah, TJ.
Yeah, I've had more than a few interactions with lawyers. I think it was always helpful as someone that dealt with anxiety and different boundaries of my own. It was always helpful to have a worker there with me, or someone that understood my background and where I was coming from, and to feel like I had support in that time and in that context. Because it can be really daunting being, navigating a system that, like, you have, that's a part of, a genocide against your own people. If you're Indigenous or you're Black or a person of color, it can be really scary. And I think you should, if there's resources out there for support to, interact with lawyers. And yeah, I think that's the best advice I could give, is to, don't be afraid to, have supports there with you.
Yeah, there's a note in here that says, because lawyers are really scary. 100% they are.
Yeah, sure.
And it can be really intimidating because you're navigating a system that you don't know. The idea of having like a support person, whether it's a family member, a trusted worker who's there. I'm not a lawyer myself, but I've often worked in like legal settings, and I think if you know that you're going to feel nervous or overwhelmed, you can try and like take some detailed notes that you go into your meeting with, so that you can refer back to those. And also, if you're in a situation where your lawyer's not treating you with respect, like, they're not allowed to do that. They shouldn't be doing that. And it is okay to, set boundaries. If you are someone who has access to a lawyer through legal aid and your lawyer has been disrespectful, not met your needs, failed to return your phone calls, ignored you, those are all reasons to ask for something that's called a change of counsel. If you, and like the tough thing about lawyers is you might feel like you don't have a lot of options because maybe a lawyer has offered to take on your case for free, or you don't know who's a good lawyer, so you just happen to work with the person who presents themselves. Again, that's where it's good for you to also take notes after your meeting with your lawyer so that you can remember what was discussed, what commitments they said that they would follow through on. And it's okay to hold this person accountable as well. Their job is to represent you, and you shouldn't feel like you need to be chasing them. There's another question here around how to manage mental health while accessing legal services. And, I'm recognizing that a lot of people are accessing legal services in a really challenging time when people might be used to going in person and talking to someone, and now everything's done by the phone. Wondering if either of you have like suggestions or things that have worked for you around keeping your cool or feeling grounded while you're interfacing with the legal system.
I think.
I love that this question just is making you fully laugh because it highlights how terrible the legal system really is.
I've had like 2 very brief phone calls with my lawyer, and that's all that's the only communication I've really had with him, so I have no suggestions on this.
Do you think that sometimes minimizing contact also is helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, I feel like it's kind of it's good and bad because I don't like, first of all, talking on the phone, and second of all, talking to a lawyer, because both of those are scary. So I like not talking to him, but also I get stressed out not knowing what is happening. So
yeah, I think it's good to it's frustrating dealing with the legal system because just it's always like very slow, regardless of pandemic or not. It's always a very slow, frustrating process, and a lot of the times it's in a context that's like hard to wrap your head around. So I think it's always good to be patient with yourself and to practice self-care and like don't overwhelm yourself all at once. There's a lot of jargon and things. I mean, I work with the legal society now, and yeah, the law and the legal aspect of things still, makes my head feel like, it's going to explode sometimes. But yeah, take your time with things, like it's going to be going slow anyways, more times than not. And reach out to, for advocacy, people that can help you translate legal documents for you, with you, because a lot of it is pretty inaccessible. The legal side of things, it's kind of intentionally just very dense language that just people that are affected by that are criminalized the most may not have access to going to law school for however many years to be able to translate these intense legal documents. So just be mindful that there is resources for you to support you through that. Yeah, and take it bit by bit, and don't just try to take it in all at once, because it's intense. It can be a lot.
Yeah, thank you both. I also think that what I've seen lots of folks do as they're feeling overwhelmed by the injustice of the system is get more involved in things like activism or solidarity work. Kind of like once you get to see that system up close, it's hard to not want to fight it. And that's why we included those calls to action, because for a lot of people, going through the legal system is a very isolating, lonely experience, where you can feel like you've done something horribly wrong and now you have to be punished forever. And that is what's really important about like meeting like-minded folks and meeting other people who might share your experiences or may have other experiences that you find a lot of like kinship with. And talking about like the world that you'd like to see. And I think that's why a lot of people have really connected with this bigger conversation around police abolition, around defunding the police, because so many people, Indigenous folks, Black folks, people of color, people with disabilities, people who don't have a lot of money, people who are trans, queer, undocumented. So many people have been harmed by these systems that we are told from when we're little kids that they're supposed to help you. But the reality is that they do so much harm. So, try and find communities, whether it's online or in person or through conversations with your friends and family around like the changes that you want to see in the world and what you'd like to imagine together. Because sometimes it can feel like there's not a lot of hope when you're up against a big, scary system that is designed to not be understandable. So with that, I just want to say thanks to the folks at Foundry for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you to Danielle for joining us and grounding us in your story.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, TJ, for also walking folks through what their rights look like. So this is where you can find Pivot online on social media, and you're also welcome to, again, take a look through our website and see if there's any resources that would be useful to you. I'm going to go back to this page just for folks who are looking for youth-specific resources around where to look, where to find things. So yeah, thanks everyone who joined today, and I hope that our presentation was useful.